Hello everybody, welcome back. I'm the Strategy Professor, and today we're going to be looking at the support tier list for the new season, Season 11, 11.1. So as always, if you enjoy the content, please be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out a ton on the channel. Check out the rest of the content as well. I'm going to release a patch notes video probably today to go along with this, and then we stream every night starting around midnight Eastern Standard Time, usually go till about 4 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Only on YouTube, very friendly, chill chat. I'm always trying to talk as much as I can about the game that I'm playing, but also just hold a conversation about whatever kind of random topics that people want to talk about in the chat as well. So it's good, friendly content. And then we also do lots of guides, patch notes and tier lists for every patch, and just tons and tons of other content on the channel. So be sure to check all that out. Okay, let's go ahead and get in here. So I have sort of changed my mind after playing in the preseason, or at least shifted my focus a little bit more towards the tanks. So I've given in a little bit, and I just kind of had to admit that Enchanters, I think, just got a lot weaker in the preseason. And I mean, that's just all there is to it. I do think that there are some spots where they're good. There still are a few that have a high win rate, like Nami and Jana are doing pretty well. But after trying out tanks a little bit more over the last, I don't know, week or so, and then after seeing the results of some recent winter tournaments at in Korea and China, I mean, it's unequivocal that tanks are just super strong. Now, some tank things have been nerfed. Some of the big tanks that get like Sunfire Aegis, like a Moo and things like that, the big boy tanks have been nerfed, but a lot of the support tanks have not been nerfed. They haven't really touched Locket. In fact, they buffed it a couple of patches ago. And they haven't, for some reason, just haven't nerfed a lot of the really popular tanks, like Leona, who was really dominant in the preseason. And was also really dominant at Worlds last year. So if we go here and look, and you got to remember that solo queue is not the same as pro play, right? But she still has a high win rate. And we'll talk about Leona in a little bit, even in solo queue. But if we look here, season 11, 1025, it just gets extreme, right? In fact, even if we just look at all roles, if you just look at the presence or just the pick rate, third most picked champion, 87% presence in games, right? And if we go to the support, 87%, that means she's either picked or banned 87% of the time and has a 59% win rate. So that means she's going to be on the losing teams a lot with a high win rate. But then Alistar, who we'll talk about in a little bit, was also really popular but had a much lower win rate. But I think he might be a little bit better than is letting on here, but we'll see after trying him out a couple of times. But anyways, it was basically Leona and Alistar every game, and then Pantheon occasionally. If we look at the picks here, Thresh occasionally, Set occasionally, Maokai occasionally, and then it falls off pretty hard after that. So what is it about tanks? I just want to talk about the meta really quick here, and then we'll go into the champions, and I'll walk you through some stuff. Well, the truth is most games are going to be 2-item games. And I'm not exactly sure why this is, because it feels like the game tempo hasn't slowed down that much in a lot of games, but stuff is just more expensive for enchanters. They did lower the price on stuff, so it was $2,700 at the beginning of the preseason for the mythics. Now it's $2,500, but that is still more than a lot of the items were before, because if you looked at enchanters before, stuff like Athene's Unholy Grail was $2,100. If you were going Sherelia's, that's like $2,050, right? Not even $2,100. A lot of the really early items, especially on enchanters, were like 2,000 gold. So now it's 400 more gold. That's a lot more expensive. And then each secondary item is way more as well. If you start looking at enchanters, right? You look at Redemption. You look at Mikhail's, Ardent Censer, Staff of Flowing Water. All those are 2,300 now, right? Versus a lot of those items, with the exception of Ardent Censer, were all about 2,100 gold. So now, by the time you get your second item, you're paying 600 or 700 sometimes more gold than you had paid in the past. And that's the difference in completing an item or not completing an item a lot of times. So that's a lot worse for enchanters. That's a lot better for tanks, because tank items were always a little bit more expensive, right? If you were getting Zeke's was always 2,400. Right? At least kind of, you know, always, meaning like last season was 2,400. And then if you were going to get Knight's Vow, I believe that was 2,300. So you're not paying that much more as a tank, but you're paying way more as an enchanter. And tanks really like low gold economies. And this is why, partially why you see them all the time in pro as well, because there's just a lot less kills to go around, right? The final score of a pro game might be 10-10 versus solo queue. It might be 40-40, right? So there's just a lot less gold to go around. And the reason that tanks are often so good at that is they have really high base stats. They have a lot of armor, a lot of HP, a lot of magic resist, and they usually have a lot of CC as well, which is difficult to quantify, but is very powerful, right? If you hit that really good Leona engage or the Alistar combo or whatever, sometimes the gold may not even matter, right? You might just win the game off of that. So CC is extremely valuable. Engage is extremely valuable, especially if other roles aren't playing Engage, which we'll talk about here in a second. But tanks just do very well in a low gold environment with very few items, and that's what we're seeing right now. So whereas last season, I think you would probably see 2.5 or 3 items in a lot of games, right? It wouldn't be uncommon to see, like, you know, an Athene's plus Redemption plus Ardent Censer plus Sherelia's or whatever. Now it's very rare to see those 3 items. I looked at it, maybe it was last week or the week before that. I kind of averaged out like my most recent 20 games, and I think it was only 20% of the time I got a 3rd item. Every other time it was less than that. And there was some percentage where I didn't even complete a 2nd item. I think like maybe 30% of the games I didn't even complete a 2nd item. So that fares very, very well for tanks because there's going to be less items to go around. And enchanters scale way better because usually they have plus healing and shielding, and they have AP ratios on their abilities. So that means the longer the game goes on, the more powerful their shields are going to be, and just the more useful they're going to be to their team. As soon as they start picking up things like the Ardent Censer, the Staff of Flowing Water, all of these like huge buffs for the team, that's when they start scaling. That's when a lot of enchanters really start running away with the game, is at 3 items traditionally. And tanks don't scale that well. Like, yes, the CC is good. Yes, you have high base stats, but you don't have the shielding, you don't have the healing, and you don't usually have a lot of AP that you're buying either. So that's why enchanters historically, like Sona and things like that, have had a much higher win rate on average than tanks. Janna and Sona, you know, would be floating at like 53, 54%, and a lot of tanks are floating at 51 or 52%. Well, that has changed, or at least equalized a lot more now in solo queue. Okay, another thing, ADCs are very strong right now. I know there's a meme, you know, that ADCs are always bad, but they're really not. It's very difficult to play, so, you know, you might have bad ADCs on your team, but you'll notice that ADCs are impactful in games, right? If your ADC gets fed, they can do a lot of damage, right? Or if the enemy ADC gets fed, they can do a lot of damage. So if we start looking at, like, the win rates on ADCs, it's actually quite high for a lot of the most picked champions outside of, you know, stuff like Ezreal. Like, Ezreal and Lucian are still a little rough, right? But Jhin is still high. He did come down from his 54%, but he's still 52.5. Kai'Sa's, you know, 52, 52.5. Misfortune, 52.5. Vayne, 52.5. Ashe, 51. Now, keep in mind, this is artificially deflated on Ashe from people going for that mandate meme build, basically, right? Because if you look at Ashe, and I'll have a separate ADC tier list for Ashe, but she's one of the most like huge differential in items out there, right? So a lot of people are still going this meme build. I guess it has fallen off a bit since last patch, but people are still getting it, right? It's still popular. This meme item, the Imperial Mandate, and then you go Manamune. It's going to be awful on this patch because they're nerfing Manamune tremendously, but that is bringing the win rate down. Probably 2 or 3%. So Ashe, if people weren't memeing, probably would be 52 or 53%. And then you have Tristana as well, who's really strong. So basically, there are a lot of really powerful ADCs that can snowball on you very, very hard. So that means you want to be strong in the lane, because the enemy ADC is going to be, like, if they get weak, if ADCs don't get a lot of gold, then most of them can't really do anything. They're not going to be that powerful, right? So if you run a really strong lane and you kill them several times, not only are you buffing up your own ADC, which is, you know, a really powerful role right now, but you're also, you know, making their ADC worthless because, you know, they just don't have a lot to offer outside of, like, Ashe with her arrow, and, like, Misfortune just does a lot of damage by pressing R. A lot of ADCs just can't really function if they're super far behind on gold. So that means you want threat. You do not want to sit there and just farm out. You want to be able to get in there and get kills. And also, there's quite a bit of just lifesteal running around in the game in general. So sometimes these poke lanes, they can still be effective, you know, like the Lux Misfortune or you know, Seraphine Jhin or stuff like that. Like, it can still be very strong, but there are, you know, more and more answers to that in the terms of lifesteal going on and the different kind of supports and rune options and all that stuff. So, you know, there's a lot of heal to go through some of that stuff too. So I think having that high threat lane, try to get those kills, level 2 or level 3, can completely turn around the game right now, even more so than it has in the past, just because ADCs are so valuable and they're so vulnerable in the early game as well. Also, other roles are, there's not really as much engage because a lot of the big boy tanks that we mentioned before, right, the Amumu's, the Ramesses, the Malphites, a lot of those things have been nerfed. You see them still, but they're not as dominant as they once were. So more and more people are opting towards fighters in the jungle and the top role. So if you look at the jungle right now, look at the most popular junglers. We have Graves, Kha'Zix, Lee Sin, Kayn. Hecarim has a little bit of CC. He at least has engaged with his ult. Echo, Master Yi, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we're going down to the 8th person before we get a proper tank with Nunu in terms of popularity. All right? And most of these champs really can't engage and start fights very well. So that means that if you can run something that engages or starts fights in the support role, that's going to help out your team in terms of composition tremendously, right? So that you can actually, you know, make the play, close out the game, force objectives, you know, all of that good stuff that, you know, tanks can do for you. Right, and if we look in the top side, there's still some. You still see Malphite here, who's popular and powerful. Now, he is nerfed on this patch, but I think he'll still be pretty good. But you're still seeing a lot of Camille, Aatrox, Darius, Irelia. Shin has a hard time starting fights. He's more reactive. Fiora, Riven. So you just really are not getting a lot of the big tanks. Ornn's in there, right? Like, there are some, but Wukong's down there. But by and large, it's just a lot of fighters, a lot of high damage dealers. So if you can play something that has a lot of CC, that can start fights and can hold people still while your team blows them up, then that's going to be really good. So once again, that can help out your team comps a lot if you can run something like a Leona instead of a Janna or a Lulu in the current meta. And then after playing, you know, hundreds of games in the preseason, I can tell you, I'm just really not impressed with these Enchanter items. I think I alluded to this a second ago in the 1 and 2 item meta, but aside from that, they just feel bad. For the most part, there are some items on some champions that are really good, and we'll talk about that. So like Moonstone on Yumi is extremely powerful, extremely strong. You know, Moonstone on Seraphine can be very good. Mandate on, you know, some champs can be very good as well. But Sherelia's has been very underwhelming. They are buffing it on this patch, so we'll see. And really, that is probably going to be played more, if at all, on tanky engage type of champions. And Locket is extremely strong right now, which is also, you know, pretty much a tank item. So the first item's okay. It's not terrible. Like, most people are just going to go Mandate on a lot of the enchanters, and it's pretty good. It has been tinkered with a bit, but it's still going to be strong. But it's once you start getting into those second items that you start to see a big difference. And a lot of it has to do with Forbidden Idol. This item has been trashed, and I've talked about this, you know, before quite a bit. They just gutted this item by taking the ability haste off of it. It just feels awful. If you go through and just look at a cost analysis of like what the item used to be and what it is now. Now, someone debated me. They're like, well, it's the standard for how ability haste is calculated. It's like, yeah, but look at where it was like last season, where it is now relative to where it was last season. Right? If we go through and look at this item, you're still paying 800 gold. You're getting 50 regen and 10 plus healing and shielding power, but you don't have any ability haste on it anymore. It used to have ability haste, right? So it used to have 10% CDR. I guess they did give it the they did give it an extra 5% healing and shielding power. So I guess there is that. I did think that it was going to be originally 10% healing and shielding power. So it's not as bad as I thought it was. But still, losing the ability haste, losing 10% ability haste is 270 gold worth of value. 5 ability power, or ability haste, used to be worth 37 gold each. So that would be 185 gold. So you're still losing about 100 gold value. So that's better than like the 200 something gold value I thought you were losing. But still, Ability haste, you need that on enchanters because your base stats are trash. As I mentioned before, you have low HP, low armor, low magic resist. So what do you have? You have your shields, you have your heals, and they need to be big, right? So yes, you do get 5% more healing and shielding, but a lot of these like really good enchanters, they have long cooldowns early. Like Janna's shield starts off like 18 seconds, scales down to 12, right? You run into Lulu's polymorph, starts off at 16, scales down to 12. Recon, his W and his E scale down to 12. So these are long cooldowns. When you think about someone like Leona, it's 5 seconds on her Q, right? Her E, it can go down to 6 seconds. So she has just baseline on the cooldowns on her abilities are just way lower than most other champs. And, this is not helping. The fact that you have to get a Forbidden Idol for, like, anything as your second item, right? If you're doing, like, Staff of Flowing Water, Redemption, Mikhail's, a lot of the big ticket items that are for enchanters are going to have Forbidden Idol in it, and it's just a really terrible item compared to what it used to be because it does not have that. Even the finished item doesn't have it. And yes, I understand somewhat why they did that. Actually, Redemption may not build out of it anymore. I think it does, but anyways, y'all get my point. But even the finished items don't have CDR on it. Staff of Flowing Water, Ardent Censer don't have CDR. Now, I get it, right? Those are really powerful items. Staff of Flowing Water gives out a buff that's worth, over 1,000 gold to each ally that it touches. It's strong. I totally get it. Same thing with Ardent Censer. Big buff, big time. But I really wish they would just at least scale back the AP a little bit, maybe make it 50 AP, maybe even 45 AP on those items, and just give it the ability haste because you really, really need that as a support. So anyways, that's it. And they don't have any sort of survivability on them either, right? So there's no armor, no magic resist, no health. And so you're just going to be very, very squishy, have no ability haste, but you have really good sort of buffs if you can protect yourself. So I get it. It's a trade-off, but just the fact that all of the enchanter stuff got far more expensive, like we mentioned before, the build path is much weaker than it used to be, and you're just going to have less items in general is just really bad for enchanters. I think it's definitely a step back from where it was at the end of last season. And then conversely, if you look at tank items improved tremendously, and Zeke's got a big buff a couple of patches ago. And you have more versatility, right? Like, I feel like you can't even get anything other than Staff of Flowing Water as an enchanter. And it just feels bad if you don't. Like, if you have to go Redemption or Mikhail's or something like that, it's such a huge sacrifice to get that item, like a Mikhail's, because you're only going to get 2 items. So just having to use one of them to get a glorified QSS. And, like, the stats on it are just weird. Like, it does have magic resist on it, like 50 magic resist. But it's like, do I always need 50 magic resist? Like, what if it's Ashe? Like, I just want to cleanse the Ashe arrow and their whole team's AD, but now I'm locked into paying for this 50 magic resist. It doesn't make sense the way that it's statted for the kind of effect that it's offering you. So it's just kind of feels bad. Versus if you look at the tank items they're very strong. You have Locket, and then on top of that, Zeke's is really good now. It has a lot of base health on it, which a lot of the tanks are going to scale with max health. And then it also has armor on it. It doesn't have magic resist anymore, but a lot of the threats now are going to be AD, especially with the nerf to all of these mage items. And you can always get Mercury Treads or something like that if you want a little bit of extra magic resist. But it's just itemized so well, and it gives so much on-hit damage. I would say it's probably going to do even more on-hit damage than Ardent Censer, potentially. Right? Because you can get that thing up to like 80 on-hit damage. And it's like, do you really need the on-hit damage for your, Orianna mid from like Ardent Censer? Do you need the on-hit damage, for your Hecarim or something? It's like, sort of, it's helpful. But if you could put have survivability and put, 80 or 90 on-hit damage on your Vayne, instead of giving her, 30 on-hit damage and giving your Orianna 30 on-hit damage. Yes, I want all of that stacked on the Vayne. And so that's what you can do now as tank. And it has 20% ability haste. 20%. So Staff of Flowing Water, 0. Zeke's, 20%. And that's something that's making tanks so good because they have so much CC, and in the past, they didn't have access to the ability haste. right? All you could get was you'd get Zeke's. If you want to get Locket, that had none last season. Zeke's had 10%. You couldn't do Ionian boots. You had to do mobility boots most of the time. And then maybe you could get Knight's Vow. That'd be another 10%. So you're capping out at really like 20%, maybe, on your CDR. But now, off of 2 items, 40 ability haste. And you can even take that little rune that gives you like 8 or 9 ability haste as well. So you're coming close to 50 ability haste, which is the equivalent of 33% CDR from back in the day. You can do that very easily off of 2 items with no sacrifices, just Zeke's plus Locket. Boom. Done. And so that's really, really strong when you have so much CC on things like Leona, and you have such powerful engage tools on some of these champs. So the tanks are just making off like a bandit with these items. And even something like Knight's Vow that I was kind of laughing at and thought was kind of garbage, like, really, it's actually pretty good. I mean, to negate 15% of the damage on one of your carries is huge. And the base health regen plus 300%, it's actually, a lot of games ends up being somewhere around like 15 health per second, which does add up in some of these longer fights. So I don't know. It just feels like you have more options. You can go Zeke's, you can go Knight's Vow, you can go Abyssal Mask if you want. If you need that extra magic resist and you want your team to do an extra 10% damage. Like, it just feels like there are more viable options on tanks, and that the 1 and the 2 item are way stronger than a lot of the other Enchanter items. And then finally, and then we'll get into the actual champions here. I just wanted to go over this meta in depth because I've kind of, like I said, I've kind of switched what my opinion was on this after playing tanks in the last week or two, and after just really being frustrated with Enchanter itemization a lot. I mean, it was so bad, I was getting Night Harvester on Recon when I went on that huge Recon run early on this season. And then Zyra, I was doing very well with her. I just have not had a lot of success on a lot of these mandate champions. And it's a lot of it because once you get to that second item, like I mentioned before, it just feels bad. Like, Staff of Flowing Water on paper is very, very strong. It's an OP item, but just in practice, it just felt like there were a lot of problems. And this is the kind of stuff that was going on that I've just tried to, verbalize here. But there's also just very high damage and a lot of high burst in all roles, especially now that a lot of people aren't playing the tanks. Right, you're getting Kha'Zix coming at you out of the jungle. You're getting Graves coming at you out of the jungle. Hecarim, diving you. You've got Camille coming at you, right? You've got Fiora coming at you. Like, there are just so many threats with a lot of damage that you just get deleted if you're trying to play an Enchanter and you get flanked in some of these fights. And so it's very tricky to just be a vulnerability for your team. Basically, if you're squishy. And this is why a lot of times in pro play, one reason among many why people play tanks is so that you can ward and so you can rotate, right? Because if you're caught out in a rotation with Leona, you're caught in the river, you can probably survive long enough for help to get there, potentially, right? Or if you're trying to go, ward the Baron area and you've got some people in your area and they're all stacked in a bush, you might be able to live, right? If you just pop your W and lock it or something like that and they blow a lot of cooldowns on you, you might be able to live and your team might be able to follow up and clean up, right? Versus if you're going to check that same bush with Janna, you're gone, right? And they don't even have to use any cooldowns to delete you. So that's a huge issue too, is there's so much damage that you're just a sitting duck when you're trying to rotate around, or if you lose vision of an area and you're trying to reestablish vision, it's just a lot more pressure on you to be able to do those things. So anyways, let's go ahead and get down here into the list, because I do want to keep this under an hour as always, but I just wanted to go through kind of my change of heart here. So after playing Leona a lot, I concur with the pro meta that she's just really, really OP, and a lot of it has to do with her cooldowns right now. So historically, why I've kind of shied away from Leona is that she's very risky. If you go in, there's no way that you're getting back out, and if you get counter engaged, or if your ADC doesn't follow up or doesn't have the power to convert the kills with you, then stuff can go south. And if you start to fall behind in the game, then it can be really hard to make things happen, right? But some of these things have changed. So, most notably, the ADCs are strong that I mentioned before, even on one item right now. Like, everybody's going to be running Gale Force, and you're going to have Gale Force Gen, Gale Force Misfortune, all this stuff. And so it's a lot easier for you to convert those kills early to snowball to get ahead. So it's a lot less likely you're going to be behind if you're playing as Leona during the laning phase, right? And if you play from ahead, she's extremely oppressive because her ult is on such a long cooldown, which brings me to my next point, which is the Locket and the Zeke's scale extremely well with her because she has so much CC that she can basically keep the Zeke's up permanently, and which is going to give your ADC an extra, you know, whatever, 70 on-hit damage, potentially. And Locket just works so well with her shield as well and the scaling on it. And then Aftershock also has extremely good scaling with her W. So she just is in a much better position than she used to be. And just the cooldowns, because they've nerfed so many other champions. Like, they've nerfed Nautilus so many times over the last year, but somehow Leona just skates away every time. But the cooldowns are absurd on this champion, right? So it's a 5-second cooldown for just 1 point in Shield of Daybreak. You just need 1 point in this, and it's 5 seconds for basically an auto attack 1 second stun, which is just nuts. So when you have this on like CDR, when you have that 50 ability haste or so, which is just once again 2 items, then this is going to be like 33% off, like a third cooldown on this. So it's like every, you know, 3.5 seconds you get a 1 second stun, and the cooldown's ticking while they're stunned. So that means they only have 2.5 seconds just to even walk around and do anything. They're going to be stunned a third of the time. You know, and then you get, that doesn't even include Zenith Blade, which can go down to 6 seconds on the cooldown, right? So if you're getting the 33% cooldown reduction here, then you're going to be able to cast it every 4 seconds. And that's going to be a half a second root. So now, basically every 4 seconds or so, they're going to be rooted or stunned for 1.5 seconds. So now it's getting close to there being like locked up for half the time. And then you have your ult, which is on a 90-second cooldown, level 1. Most other engaged champions, as low as it gets, is going to be 120. I guess Bard is a little lower. Bard's like 100. But like Nautilus is 120. A lot of champs are going to be in the 120 range, but for some reason she starts at 90. So by the time you get to level 11 and you have that cooldown reduction, you know, this is going to go below 1 minute, right? It's going to be like a 45-second cooldown on this, which is nuts. I mean, I've seen it when you get to level 16 at some point. Like, I've literally had like a 25-second cooldown before without even like a meme build, just like normal items. So that means you can almost do it twice in a team fight if it's a really extended fight or you're chasing people down at the end. So the cooldowns are just nuts. She's a CC machine, and she's super tanky in the early game because this does, not only does it give you a lot of armor and magic resist, so 20-20 to start with 20% scaling, which includes Aftershock once you proc Aftershock on somebody, but there's also a flat amount of damage reduction at 8. And it's pre-mitigation. So this is before resistances check, damage from every instance up to a maximum of 50%. This includes minions from every instance of damage. And minions do a lot of damage in the early game. So when you're getting hit, you know, for 20 from those ranged minions, you're really only going to be getting hit for like 10. And just imagine, right? If you take whatever 10 hits from minions, that's going to save you like, I don't know, 50 to 100 health. Like, it's a lot of HP. So not only is it the armor, the magic resist, but this is everything. This is minion hits, this is scorch procs, this is press the attack, this is comet, airy. I mean, just there's all auto attacks, all sorts of just little things that do a small amount of chip damage. She's just almost immune to damage, especially in the early laning phase. And she can engage through minions. This is a huge theme that you'll notice in a lot of my top picks. They can go through the minions with their stuff, so you're never safe. When she's sitting just right there staring you down, like right there in the minion wave, and you can't hit her with your skill shots, but she can hit, you know, she can hit you with hers, then that's very intimidating. And if she catches you with this E, it's a big problem. Like, you're probably going to die because she does a lot of damage too. Like, these sunlight procs at level 3, it's 40 each, but if you go in with your E, auto attack, reset your auto attack with your Q again, that's 80 extra damage. And then when your W hits them, that's 120 extra damage off of her passive. So she's just really hard to kill. She can engage from almost anywhere. She's just a CC machine that scales extremely well with ability haste. She roams really well. She has a really long engage range with this 1200 range. And that's very, very far. And if she hits you at this, she's almost certainly going to hit her E afterwards. So she just works really well with Locket and Zeke's. she's just a terror. Like, she's really, really hard to deal with if you get ahead, and there's nowhere to hide if you're an ADC a lot of the time. So there's a reason that she has that much presence. Now, in solo queue, she does only have like a 52% win rate, but you do have to be careful. You don't want to pick bad fights, because if you start a fight and your team's not there, right, if you don't look at the mini-map and you start a 4v5, or you don't know where the jungler is and they come down and counter gank you, or just you're otherwise just making mistakes with your engages, then yes, she's going to have some problems. You can punish her really hard for being out of position. But man, if your team's on point and they're following up, so just make sure that you're pinging people before you go in. Just let them know, give them notice, say, hey, I'm going in, and a lot of times hopefully they'll be able to follow up. But yeah, super, super strong right now. I highly recommend. And you can check out these little mini Google Docs as well. I'm not going to click on all of these every time, but you can just kind of see what I recommend with different champions. Now, Unflinching is kind of popular as well. I do like the health one, Overgrowth. It gives you like 150 extra health in the mid to late game. Now, I really like Ulti Hunter and Ghost Poro. Ghost Poro just gives you a lot of extra vision in the early game, and it ends up giving you 30 AP. You don't have a ton of AP ratios with Leona, but it's a little bit of extra damage, but mostly it's just for that early game vision. And then Ulti Hunter, I just want to have as many ults as I can. Your ult's already on a low cooldown, but that's what I like. Now, you can go for something like Hex Flash if you want. It's probably pretty popular. Hex Flash, Cosmic Insight can give you, I think it's 15% cooldown on your summoners. So it's either 10 or 15, I can't remember. But that'll allow you to have more flashes, more ignites. So there's some pretty good stuff out there. Biscuits can give you some sustain. So there are a few different options, but I really, really like the Ulti Hunter on champs that have good engage. Okay, that's it for Leona. Let's talk about Recon. Now, I have Recon a lot higher than many other people are going to have him. Sorry for the slideshow. Go ahead and fix that there. There we go. But I have Recon much higher than a lot of other people are going to have him out there. And it's because he does have really good engage, but he also is kind of the best of both worlds, where you can go for that Staff of Flowing Water, the Mandate, and you can go for that scaling. He does have shields as well. So he's really good at protecting your allies from assassins. Now, assassins, there will probably be a little bit less of them. This is probably going to be Patch of the Bruisers. We'll see, because a lot of the assassin items got nerfed. Go check out my patch notes for info on that. But nevertheless, he's still pretty good. Right? He does have an engage that can go through minions anytime, anywhere with the W. So that's very handy. And then his ultimate is just so good, because you can run down people. If they have their flash, they have their Gale Force or their dash, you can still just run them down, wait on them to use that, wait on them to use their dash, and then you can W after them and knock them up. So he does have the scaling option with Staff of Flowing Water. He can go Ardent Censer if he wants to, but he can also go for something like a Zeke's if you do want to be a little tankier. Now, the one thing with Recon is if they have a lot of CC, it could be a problem, right? So if you're staring down a Maokai or something like that and he just presses W on you, you're probably dead. Or there's some obscure picks like Veigar and Poppy that can be kind of rough. Now, Leona is something that I've been able to win that side of the matchup as Recon in the past, but the itemization is a lot better for Leona right now, so I'm not exactly sure how that's going to go, but we'll see. I think he does have good engage. He can outscale some of the other ones if you do get to that second or third item. Still roams well, has some sustain in the lane, so if you're going to be against double poke or something like that and you can hit some Qs, you can make it through the laning phase. You can, of course, shield your ally to help prevent some of that poke early on. So he does have some nice versatility to him. Now, they are buffing Sherelia's quite a lot on this patch. I still think you'll probably go Mandate on him, but that will give you one more tool if you do have a lot of these bruisers, which I think will be very strong on this patch. So if you have like your Dariuses, your Aatroxes, just stuff like that wants to run in there, being able to run a Sherelia's is nice. And you're not missing out as much by not running Locket, because you don't have to have the tank items, right? If it's Leona and you go Sherelia's, you're losing out on a lot of defense, because not only do you not have the resistances, but those resistances aren't scaling with your W. Versus Recon, you can kind of get away going squishier, right? Because you have the mobility. You can get in and get out. So I still think that Recon is very good if you want to play an Enchanter, if you have an ADC that scales really well, with Staff of Flowing Water or Ardent Sensor, and you think that you can get away with it, I think that Recon is going to be a very good choice. But Zaya is getting buffed up on this patch too. God, my hair just looks so crazy. I need to get a haircut at some point. Well, that looks even dumber. But anyways, I think he will be very good. So he is very versatile. So you have to think carefully about which items that you're getting, because you can change it every game. But overall, if they don't have a lot of CC, or if you think you're going to be able to avoid it, then I think he can be a very strong choice. Okay, now part of that is that I've just played a lot of Recon and I'm pretty good on him, I think, relative to a lot of people in my ELO, so there's definitely some bias in there, but I think he does have a lot of the tools, if you're well practiced on him, to make it in this meta. Okay, I've got Malachi out here. I know that Delub has been, wanting me to have Malachi on this list for a while, and I wasn't really sure about it because a lot of the AP items did get nerfed, but that he may have gotten in the past, particularly Mandate. Just the first proc of it got nerfed by like 40 or 50 damage. So Mandate used to do something in the neighborhood of like 80 damage up front and then 80 more damage on the second proc, and then they lowered it all the way down to like 35 up front, something like that. And so that hurts a lot of these poke mages where there's not going to be follow up every time. So like the seeds with Maokai coming out of the bush and hitting somebody, if your team doesn't follow up, that's doing a lot less damage than it did in the past. But he's so versatile right now, and I think there are some itemization choices that a lot of people aren't really using a lot. So a couple of things about Malachi, and I've played him a lot in the past. So like last spring I played Malachi when I was getting up to Diamond back in March or April, and there's a lot of things that people really underestimate about him. First of all, the E. So people know it does a lot of damage now. They may not know exactly how much damage it does. It does 125, I think, at max rank, but then it also does like 16% of their max health potential AoE, like if it's in a bush. So it's a lot of damage. But it lasts for so long. It's like 30 seconds. It scales with your max health, so it could last longer than that. And it gives you so much vision. So that's really a huge thing. And you can cast it from like 300 units, or not 300, but like 1,100 units away or something. It's a very, very long range. So it is extremely difficult to sneak up on Maokai. So he's very good late game just to scout out stuff, and he just gives you so much extra vision because you don't have to use your wards. Usually you have to walk your wards forward, ward over a wall and just make sure nobody's there, and then, use some skill shot to check a bush and then move your wards forward over time. But you can't get the best wards that you want because you've already had to use your wards just to establish that initial vision if you ever lose it. But with him, you can use the seeds to check and to get the vision and hold on to your wards, so you can get those perfect deep vision wards when you're trying to contest objectives. So very, very good. One of the best in the game at vision control. I like Zyra a lot too, but the thing is, hey, thanks for the sub, I appreciate it. These aren't integral to your interactions in a fight, right? You still have your Q, you still have your W. Versus with Zyra, if you use those seeds, it's a very big deal. Hey, thanks for the sub, I appreciate it. It's a very big deal if you use those seeds, because that's a lot of your damage. That's a lot of what you're supposed to do as a Zyra to get vision of the bushes. With Malachi, you just toss a sapling there, 10-second cooldown, no problem. You still have your Q if you need it. You still have your W. You still have your ult. You still have a lot of tools in your toolkit. So, and it's a very long range, 1,100, like I said. Pretty affordable mana cost, and it's at 16% max health with 250 base damage. That's a lot. So if you're hitting somebody that has 1,500 health, that's going to be like 240 damage, almost 500 damage off of this thing in a bush. So it does a lot, and it lasts for 30 seconds, like I said before, and scales up depending on your max health. So it's a very, very powerful ability, and that's something that makes him unique from a lot of other tanks, is the fact that he does damage and he has extremely good vision control. Another thing that's very nice is Twisted Advance. Now, it's low range, so it's only 525 range, so it's hard to engage with this if you don't get a flanker, you don't use your flash, or you don't have some other kind of tool like a Sherelia, which is getting buffed on this patch, so that could be interesting. Some people do the Dead Man's Plate to get some extra movement speed to get close. So there are some tools you can get, but by default, it's not a great engage tool. However, they can't dodge it. So that's what's really awesome about this, is that, you know, if you just W onto somebody and they're thinking they're going to Gale Force and dodge all the CC, they're not Gale Forcing out of this. Ezreal's not Eing away from this. They're not flashing away. You're going to get them. All right, and so that's what's very, very good. And it's just basically instant. You just go on them. Right, so one thing with Nautilus, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, is his stuff like has cast animations. His ultimate has that like quarter second or half second animation to it, where if they go invisible or something, then it cancels the animation, which is, or they go in a bush or something, it cancels the animation, which is really annoying. It's not going to happen with Malachi. You're going to get him, basically. Now, maybe if it's like a Master Yi or an Elise and they go untargetable or something while you're midair, or if they hourglass or something, then yeah, of course, that's going to disrupt it. But they can't do any sort of movement thing to stop you from going on them. And you also become untargetable. So this can be very good for getting out of like a Veigar cage if he's trying to cage you, or, you know, there's some like neat tricks here. You can negate a tower shot as well later on. So you can take like one more tower shot and then like W onto a minion. Usually you're using the W to lock somebody up under towers. That option's not going to be available, but it's maybe there, or like a Karthus ult coming down, or if you just can't move out of a Jinx ult or an Ezreal ult or something, you can go untargetable for a second. So there are a lot of interesting things you can do to avoid damage. You just got Fizz fished, and there are some minions around. You can W, I believe, and get out of that damage if you do it at the right moment. So there's a lot of little tricks you can do with that. Then you also have Bramble Smash, which is a good displacement spell to stop movement. So if you have a Jarvan trying to flag and drag onto your ADC, or a Lee Sin, you know, trying to connect with that second Q, or a Zac trying to engage with his E, just anything like that, you can use that Bramble Smash to displace and knock people out of it. So he's got a lot of tools in his toolkit. He can actually get some AP. He does some damage. And then his ultimate is extremely difficult to dodge. It's a very, very wide... I mean, it takes up almost an entire lane. Now, it's very slow moving. So once again, it's kind of hard to engage with it. But once you start that, it's extremely difficult to dodge for a lot of champions. And it CCs up to a crazy amount. So if you just like start this, you know, a fight's going to break out. You just throw this from the river and then just run in there and just lock them up with your W, and then just use your Q to like knock them into it. You know, it's going to CC them usually for like 2 seconds, all the way up to 2.6. So it's a very, very long piece of CC on a pretty low cooldown for 120. So... and he has the highest win rate right now overall for supports. Now, one thing that I will note here is there are different options with him. He's a lot more versatile than people think he is in terms of build. So a lot of people do like the Mandate, and you can go Mandate on him. It does give him the extra mana. Ability power is nice. And it does that little bit of extra damage whenever you hit people. Now, that tooltip is bad. It's not 90 to 150 anymore. It's somewhere... closer to like 35, so they did nerf the damage on it, but it's still going to be pretty solid. But there are other options, right? Like you can do the Kim tank, and that can give you an engage option, especially if they have a lot of magic damage on their team. That could be decent. Sherelia's has a 60% win rate, and that's getting buffed right now. Now, that's not a huge sample size, only 1,000 people, but, you know, that might be an option in certain team comps if you want to get in there and, you know, be an engage. It can be good. But Locket's also pretty solid. If you need Locket, you want a little more team fight presence, you can have Locket. So there are different options there. And yes, the demonic mask is pretty good, but you know, like I mentioned before, some people are going Deadmans just so they can roam around and get better engages, and that's totally viable. Zeke's another one if you want to be a little tankier, can be viable. So you do have the damage options if you want it, but you also have the tank options, because remember, he has really high base stats, just like a tank, and he has a self-heal with his passive. And he has scaling with his health on his seeds, right? So they stay out longer. You get even more vision, or you get even more vision out of him. So, you know, there's a lot of different ways that you can build him. He's versatile. He's got engage. He has poke. He has damage. He's got a lot of good stuff. He doesn't have like just a bare bones, like really solid engage tool like a Leona or an Alistar, but you can give him those tools if you want it, or you can just make him into a glorified poke mage, just a better version of Teemo with lots of CC with those seeds, if you want to go for Mandate plus Demonic Embrace, which is what a lot of people are getting. So anyways, lots of options, can be pretty strong. Was actually played in Pro a little bit, and I believe that they went for one of those hybrid builds I was talking about. It was mostly Barrel, I believe, from Don Juan Gaming, the world champs. So he was mostly going for, I believe, Mandate and then Innocent Tank Items, I believe, after that. So yeah, Mandate into... Actually, what was he going there? I'm not even sure what he was going for there. But he wasn't going for the mask in a lot of situations. But anyways, very good champ. Lots of different options. Okay, and then I moved Alistar up a little bit as well. And he's similar to Leona in the sense that you can be in the lane and just start a fight anytime, anywhere. And I think that's so valuable right now with a lot of these early game powerhouse ADCs that are going to be getting Gale Force, because you do just want those kills. So you can just stand there and just stand right in front of the minions, and you can just start a fight anytime you want. Now you might ask yourself, well, why would you pick, Alistar over Leona then? There's a couple of reasons. Number one, Alistar can dive level 6 really early if you need to. So if you get ahead, you can power dive him early. He does have sustain in his kit with his roar, so you can go in and take a trade early, maybe get somebody low, and then just wait a few waves, get a couple of roars off, and then you're slowly going to be a little bit stronger. Or if you're afraid that you might get poked out early on, but you still want to play an engaged champion and just wait on your jungler or something to come down and help you out, Alistar can be okay with that because he does have that innate sustain. Basically, every wave and some change, you're going to get a roar, which is going to give you a nice heal. And he has pretty good peel. So, Leona really can't peel that well, right? Like, she can attach to people and be, like, very sticky on them, but she can't knock them, like, out of the way, right? Versus Alistar's headbutt, if there's an assassin, like, running at your AD carry or whatever, a Hecarim, and they don't ult, like, you can not, like, physically knock them back. Not only CC them, but you can push them away from your AD carry to give that space and have that Q in there. So that is pretty handy. So his like CC is not going to be as strong as something like a Leona. It's going to be on a longer cooldown, and it's a little more conditional. But he does have the sustain. He does have a peel option. Part of it is a knockup, so it gets around tenacity. Has good interactions with Samira and Yasuo, who prefer knockups. So there are a lot of spots where you might want Alistar and decent into something like a Leona. And that's why he's picked a lot in Pro, although Leona got the best of him, it looks like, most of the time, the 60% win rate versus the 40%. But, if Leona engages on your ADC, you can W and, just knock away their ADC, and then as you're walking back, you just Q, knock up the Leona, and then your ADC gets a really good trade back on their support. So, he is pretty good. I'm not entirely sure that he should be tier 1, but I played him, in a match. Felt pretty good for the most part. You don't have as much damage, you don't have as much CC, but you are super tanky early on. So he would be a very good candidate to do something like a Sherelia, because he does have the option of, just using his R and becoming unkillable, versus Leona, needs a bit more in the resistance department. So, still going to be pretty strong. Leona is probably better, but I think that he's going to be a good tank option if that's what you're looking for. Maybe Sherelia's, maybe not. Now, there are some people who are doing Phase Rush on Alistar. I am not sure about that build. I still think that Conquer, or Aftershock, rather, is going to be a better option. Just, yes, he does have the ult. Yes, he doesn't need Aftershock as much once he's 6, but still in the laning phase, I think it is going to be a little bit better. And most people are going Locket, but Sherelia's already has a higher win rate. Kim Tank has a pretty high win rate, so might be exploring Sherelia's a little bit more. So Phase Rush is okay. It's about the same win rate as Aftershock. It's pretty close. The reason you would go Phase Rush is as soon as you WQ in and then start your E, then you're going to get that bonus movement speed, which is going to allow you to stick to somebody to make sure that you get that stun off second. My big issue with this build is it just feels like the rest of the stuff is just going to be garbage on him, right? So it's like you don't need mana. I mean, I guess you can go Nimbus Cloak and get a little bit more movement speed, and then you can go, Celerity for a little more movement speed, and then, Water Walking so you can run up and down the river. But that just feels so much worse to me than something like Demolish, Bone Plating, Overgrowth, or Unflinching. Just feels like all of these are going to be way more impactful secondaries. Because all you need that speed for, really, is just to land your E, right? And then after that, your cooldowns are so long, like all the speed's gonna go away by the time you get any more cooldowns. So I don't know. I think it's a little too cute. It makes it a lot harder to tower dive as well. So I don't know. I would probably rather have Aftershock, but to be fair, I haven't really tried the Phase Rush. Like, I can respect what it's trying to do, but I'd probably rather just be tankier for all ends. It might depend on how hard you think you're going to dominate a matchup. Okay, and then Thresh. We got to hurry up. We got to get through the rest of these. Thresh is another one who is seeing some more play. Now, you could put Thresh even lower. I really thought about putting Galio up in tier 1 instead of Thresh, but Thresh did have better representation at the, most recent major tournament. Galio was pretty good too. They both have a similar win rate. Like, Thresh is 51%. I think Galio is also 51%, so they're very close. But the nice thing about Thresh is his versatility. The reason that I'm kind of tempted to put him a little bit lower is just that I feel like his engage is a bit more conditional than these. Alistar WQ start a fight, Maokai W start a fight, Leona start a fight, Recon start a fight. Like, you can get a fight anytime you want to fight with these champions most of the time. And they can go through the minion wave, all of them, and start those fights, right? Versus Thresh is more conditional. His hook has a big delay on it. A lot of champions can dodge it, especially if you have a Gale Force or if you're Ezreal, who hopefully we won't see a lot of Ezreal on this patch. But Lucian or just anything with dashes. Samira can also outplay it. Remember, Samira can't do anything against any of these champions because they don't use projectiles. I guess she can block the Leona E. But a lot of this stuff, she can't do anything about it. So it's a lot harder to get that fight with Thresh. However, you don't have to commit to the fight. So if it is a really spooky fight and you land your hook, you don't have to go in. Right, you can just use it as CC, so you can do it over walls safely. Hook somebody, maybe your team just gets some poke. Maybe someone else goes in, right? So you don't have to commit. You do have that extra versatility there as Thresh, and you can go lock it, and then if you want to, you can go something like a Redemption. You can still go Zeke's, you can still go Knight's Vow, but you could go a Redemption if you want to do a more utility type of Thresh build, right? Because he does have some decent shielding off of his W. And then that means that you can also go Guardian. So because you don't have to commit fully to the fight, you can hang out in the back and have that shield to protect your ADC. So, and of course you have the utility of him, right? You have the Lantern that can be used offensively to pull your jungler in, or you can use it defensively to save people from rough situations. It's got the shield on it. So he always has that Thresh utility. He's got the displacement off of his E. I will say his damage in general, I think, is going to be a bit lower than something like a Leona, a Malachi, maybe even an Alistar in the mid game. Early game, his auto attacks do hit pretty hard. If you have a fully charged up auto attack, like your E is charged up, you can get pretty decent damage in the early game. But I feel like he just doesn't do as much damage as some of the other ones. Also, he's really hard to play because you have that delay on your hook. A lot of people are used to that and they can dodge it. So you have to come up with creative ways to either anticipate where they're going and throw the hook preemptively in that way and do the no-look hook and all. There's all these fancy ways to work around it, or just lock out vision and hit them out of bushes with the hook. But it's a lot harder to play and get correct, especially because there's so many different ways you can play them and so many different decisions, right? Do you hang back? Do you go forward? Do you take that hook or not, right? Do you save that Lantern defensively or offensively? Are you going to flay, somebody off of your AD carry, or are you going to flash forward and flay somebody to set them up for a hook? So there are just so many different ways you can play him, versus really with Leona and Alistar, when you go in, you're committed, right? You're going in, you're using the cooldowns, you're deleting somebody most of the time. So he's a lot harder to play. It's a lot more conditional. It's not guaranteed on the engage. He does have good scaling. He does have good utility. So I'll go ahead and put him up there. But and his base stats are way lower than someone like a Leona. Fun fact, he actually has some of the lowest armor in the game. He gets extra armor from the souls and extra AP from the souls, but you have to accumulate those over time. And he doesn't get any armor per level. So like Leona and Alistar and stuff like that, they're going to get 3 armor per level. So they're already getting something like 4 or 5 souls worth of armor for free just for leveling up. So in order to really surpass them in terms of armor, you have to start getting to something like 80 souls in a game. And a lot of games are going to be over before then. So He is fun, he is very good, but he is squishier than a lot of people think he is, especially compared to someone like Alistar or Leona. So it is going to be a lot riskier for you to take that hook and go in, especially if you're going for something like Guardian plus Redemption. You're going to get deleted in big team fights, so you better be very careful when you're picking your fights in the big fights. So is very good, but also very conditional. Historically, he's just smashed Leona as well if you're good on him, but she's really just been like powering through him lately just because of just how strong she is right now. Okay, other choices, and this gets a little more iffy. I feel like these are pretty good. There are some you could throw up there, but this is a little more iffy. So Bard, I still think is pretty good. I will say after playing a pretty good chunk of Bard in the preseason, he doesn't feel as good as he did at the end of last season. Part of that is your W is very, very anemic, the heal without Athene's Unholy Grail. Because beforehand, you know, your little dinky 100 heal on your W or whatever, it can get to like 150, I think, when it's maxed out. Wasn't really that much, but if you had Athene stacks, then it was 300, and that was actually significant. So Athene's was actually quite important on him in a lot of matchups. You can use Mandate, and it's okay. Like, your auto attacks do slow. It does apply Mandate procs and stuff like that. Like, it's cute, but the AP is not super great on him. It's okay. You could say the same thing about Athene's, I suppose. Athene's only costs 2,100, though, versus Mandate costs 2,500. So it's just kind of awkward. Maybe Sherelia's is going to be a bit better because then you can hit your ult and then Sherelia's and get your team to go in there. So that's nice. But it just feels like his core items, which used to be like the Athene's, the Dead Man's Plate, sometimes Rapid Fire Cannon. He just kind of had some weird items he would get. Redemption, like all of these have been nerfed or changed in some way that are not as beneficial for him. And with a lot of people running Gale Force, it's very easy to dodge the ult if you have some kind of dash. And now, you know, your Jin's gonna have it, Graves is gonna have it. Just so many people are gonna have Gale Force, and it's on a 60-second cooldown, so it's always gonna be up. And they can just use those dashes to dodge out of your ult. So because it's so choreographed, right? They know for like a second before it lands, it just feels like it's going to be really hard to hit it, right? Versus something like a Leona, you know, they've got that half a second, and yes, they can still dodge it, but you still have other stuff to start the fight if you need to, right? You still have your E. It's going to be on like a 30-second cooldown late game with your R. So I don't know. He just feels a little vulnerable. If you get engaged, obviously his base stats are going to be lower. So if you get, you know, pounced on by the Alistar or the Leona, you're probably going to get blown up early game. So he does roam very well. You know, he can still engage on the non-mobile champions. There are fewer and fewer of those because there's so many items now that can give a little bit of extra movement speed or a little bit of extra dashes or what have you. So he's good. I just think that, especially with Gale Force is really bad news for him just because it's so easy to dodge out of everything, that I just put him a little bit lower. So he's still playable. He can still be strong. It's just the itemization is not amazing on him these days because stuff is just more expensive. And he just doesn't synergize with a lot of the good items like some of the other champs do. But he's still definitely respectable. Nami is the highest enchanter that I have on here. And she works very, very well with Mandate right now. And she has a really high win rate. She's like a 53% win rate. So Nami is very good. And she's lane dominant. Right? You can just walk up and just spam your E over and over again on the ADC every time they're trying to farm through the minion wave. You know, kind of like with a lot of the tier 1 champs. You can harass through the minion wave and still protect yourself. If you're not against one of these champs, you can still protect yourself with the minion wave. And she's got the bubble, so if you land that bubble, you can probably get a kill in the laning phase. And your E just works so well with Mandate and your passive because it's going to speed people up, and then whenever someone attacks somebody with your E on them, it still triggers Mandate. So they're going to get the Mandate proc on them from your E, and then whenever they auto-attack, it's going to trigger it as well. So I had thought initially that you had to E yourself and then auto-attack them in order to get the Mandate trigger, but that's not true. If you put the E on your ally, it's still going to do the first and the second proc of Mandate on them. So it just makes her into, you know, just a movement speed machine. You can just run it. You can put that on your ally. They're going to run anybody down. So if you put that on Vayne or Kaisa or whatever, it's just off to the races. Like, they're going to be so fast. They're going to get so much extra damage because they're getting your passive movement speed. They're getting mandate movement speed. They're getting Staff of Flowing Water movement speed when you trigger these things on them, if you take Airy, which you probably should. And you're applying that slow on them. So they're getting 3 different movement speeds plus a slow. Good luck getting away from that. Or good luck, like, catching them if they're kiting you. So she just has a lot of utility she can give over to her team. And she just synergizes probably the best of any enchanter, or certainly very close with the Mandate plus Staff of Flowing Water meta. So I just moved her down a little bit just because if you do get caught by one of these champions in the early game, you will die. So it is going to be rough, but she is one of the better enchanters out there. Her R is also very good at disengaging, right? So if they do have some of this later on, and you can see this coming, so like if Leona uses her ult to engage, you can use your ult, you know, to push her out of there potentially if you can get it fast enough. So she does have some answers late game. She does scale pretty well. She does have kill threat in the early game, so she's going to be pretty solid right now. Galio is another one that I just put on here, and I haven't really been a believer in Galio in the past, but he did get played in pro some, and I was just kind of looking him over. He has been nerfed fairly recently, and I think, you know, I had thought of him as a peeler tank before, and I've just never really been that interested in peeler tanks in solo queue. So stuff like your Braum, your Tom, and I was thinking he was a lot closer to that, but I think that his engage is going to be a little bit better than I was giving it credit for, because you can just E in with your Justice Punch, and then even if you don't connect, so that's 650 range, even if you miss them, or you're not quite in range, then you can just channel your W, and that's going to be up to 350 range. So your effective range there is going to be 1,000 for your engage, if they don't have a flash or a dash. So yes, it's still going to be difficult to catch someone like Lucian or Ezreal with this, but, or if they have Gale Force, obviously that's going to be a bit of a problem too. But, you know, if you are playing at something that, like a Misfortune or something like that, and you can get up close to them, then you can still have a little bit of an engage. And he peels, you know, really, really well. He's got the Justice Punch. He's got the Taunt. So, like, if Leona engages on your ADC, you can just, you know, hold on to this Taunt. Like, you can Justice Punch their ADC if you see an opportunity, and then taunt him, and you're probably going to get the better end of that trade. He does a lot of damage in the early game, but particularly he's really good against magic damage, like hard engaged teams. So if they have something like a Zyra or a Brand, Orianna, Rise, I mean, things like that, he's going to be really, really good. 'Cause I didn't realize, because they've changed him so many times, that whenever he ults an area, he gives his shield to everyone in that area immediately. So it doesn't, you don't have to wait until he lands. You get it immediately. So even just being able to throw down, if you have 2,000 health and you have your W maxed out, it's going to be a 400 shield. So just being able to throw that shield on your allies and then, you know, fly in and save them potentially can be very strong. And a lot of people have sort of changed the way they're approaching him as support as well. If we start to look at some of these builds on him, people are not doing as much of the AP builds, and they're building him more tank, and they're speccing into the W instead of the Q. And that's what has the high win rate, right? So that's what the 56% win rate is. The Q maxes are far lower. So if you go Q into E into W, that's only a 48% win rate right now. Almost 49, but very low, right? And then the Q, W, E is the 52% win rate. So his best win rates are W max, and then E is the best one, or you could do Q. Because then you don't have to worry about the mana cost, because his other abilities really don't cost that much, right? 50 mana for all ranks of W, Justice Punch, 50 mana for all ranks of Justice Punch. So you don't even have to itemize into mana if you don't want to. So I think that that is a new approach to him that actually works out really well. And CDR is very, very strong on him. So like I was talking about with Leona, and a lot of the tanks now, you can get 50 ability haste or pretty close to it very, very easily. Just 2 items, right? Just pick your mythic, lock it, you know, whatever. Probably lock it. Sometimes people go mandate on him, and then just Zeke's. And, you know, you've got it. And he has a really long cooldown, super high impact ult. So 200. Because if you didn't know this, ability haste, you get a lot more value out of it the longer the cooldowns are, right? Because that's going to be shaving off a lot. That's shaving off like almost a minute or two. Probably about a minute or so. Off of this ultimate. That's a very big deal, right? Versus if something's like a 2-second cooldown and you get 30% off of that, it's like, okay, you know, you got like whatever, a little bit more than half a second, right? But with this, when you're getting over a minute off on that, that's a very, very big deal. And it has a huge range on it. So very, very good if you have a team fight comp or they have a lot of melees that are trying to hard engage on you. It's a really nice tool. And especially if they have a lot of magic damage. So I'm going to have to try him out. I haven't personally played him, but I've watched some pros play him, and I've just kind of theory crafted him here. And, you know, I just really haven't looked at him as a support in a very long time. I just kind of cast him aside. But I think with a lot of the new tank stuff, it's possible that he could be coming back. Now, he does have pretty low armor. He's only got 24 armor, so do not do this against very heavy AD lane. So don't play this into Senna Jhin or, you know, something like that in the bot lane, because he's going to be a lot squishier than other tanks in that respect early on. But he's very, very good against mages. What is his base magic resist is only 32, so it's not that high either. But I'm not saying play him all the time, but I'm saying, you know, explore him, and there might be certain comps where you need a counter engage or something like that that could be pretty good. Obviously going to be good into things like a Moo. So he's worth considering. Okay, Yumi is another one, and it's really hard to figure out where to put Yumi on this list. And I know we're over an hour, but I at least want to get these last couple ones here. Yumi can feel completely unstoppable if you can get out of the laning phase. And I mean, I've had games where sometimes they don't even get out of the laning phase. Like the Yumi, like she'll literally be 0-7. Like I've had some games where the enemy bot lane is like 2-12 or something like that, right? Like the AD carries like 2-5 and the Yumi's like 0-7, and then this Yumi just takes over the game late game, because all it takes is one person on that team to be really fed and be playing a 1v9 champion. And when you have that Yumi attached to the Kayn that's got 10 kills, or the Fiora, or the Camille, or just the Graves, or just any number of other champions that are really OP, she just amplifies that power so much with her W, the movement speed, the attack speed that she gives out, the AoE ultimate, and the fact that you can't target her later on, especially with a lot of these bruiser champions that have a lot of lifesteal that probably aren't going to die, right? When you've got the Red Kayn with the Gore Drinker and, you know, Ravenous Hunter, Sterix, all of that stuff, like you're never killing him when Yumi's attached to him. So that just basically makes her a tank. If you put her on a tank, late game, she's a tank. Most of the times, you got to kill them before you kill her. So that's why she's kind of unique compared to a lot of other enchanters, and sort of that concern I was talking about where there's a lot of burst damage, and if you're an enchanter, you know, you might be very vulnerable later in the game. Yumi doesn't have to worry about that. Now, she can't rotate very well, and she doesn't have great vision control unless, you know, your tank is helping you do that. So that's the biggest knock, in my opinion, is that the best Yumi build doesn't have boots. And so you can't rotate, you can't ward unless you have help, and that's going to be a problem late game. Unless you're playing on like an organized team or something like that. It can be pretty rough, but a lot of this stuff is very, very good with Yumi. Now, they did nerf Presence of Mind, which a lot of people thought was going to gut Yumi, but she still has plenty of mana. For the most part, like you can't spam your Q like you did in the past, and you can't spam your E to just zip around the map, so you can actually run out of mana now, but it's so strong, right? You have Moonstone particularly is ridiculous on her, because I believe if you have Aerie, whenever you jump from person to person in a fight, it resets the Moonstone trigger. So as long as anybody's in combat, if you're just jumping around on people in the fight, Moonstone is always running. Versus with other champs, you have to either auto-attack somebody or use some kind of cooldown on somebody in order to keep the Moonstone rolling every 2 seconds. But Yumi, just by existing, right, just jumping around, using, you know, your E and everything, it seems like she just gets these crazy numbers on Moonstone that a lot of other champs don't get. Like, I routinely see her get 4,000 or 5,000, and I've seen as high as like 10,000. These are after the nerfs to Moonstone. Anecdotally, people in the chat have told me they've gotten up to like 18,000 before the nerfs. But it's just an insane amount of healing, and she can get away with it because she doesn't need to be tanky. And she gets it so fast because she doesn't have to buy boots. So that's another issue with enchanters that I mentioned before. Like, you're down a lot of gold, right? Because you have to pay this extra 600 or 700 gold in order to buy your mythic and then start buying your Staff of Flowing Water and all that stuff. You only get 2 items. Yumi, there's a much higher chance you're going to get to that third item because you don't have to spend 900 gold on boots. Right? You just go no boots, and you're going to get your Moonstone online way faster, unless the enemy team is getting a lot of kills. Everything being equal, you're getting your Moonstone way faster, which is going to be a huge power spike for your team, and you're going to get Staff of Flowing Water faster, which it just helps you snowball. So she just solves a lot of the problems. Her kit solves problems that enchanters have right now. She gets the items. She gets her power spike faster. She's not going to be as vulnerable to a lot of the damage out there. Scales extremely hard. She also can't threaten in the lane. So if you pick like Yumi with something that's going to be weak in lane like Vayne or Ezreal, and they have Draven and Jhin, you know, Draven or Jhin, I should say, it could be a problem, right? Because you're going to lose that lane. Your ADC is going to go down, 40 CS. They could get dejected and just AFK, or they could start feeding. There's a lot of bad stuff that happens when you sacrifice the lane for 15 minutes. But if you can get away with it, she's super, super strong. So if you're on a good team with lots of different options to jump to, and your AD carry, knows how to play around that with Yumi, I think she's definitely tier 1 right now. But just because she's so volatile, just because you're almost always going to lose lane, then I've got her down at tier 2. Coincidentally, this is the highest win rate I think she's ever been, or it's certainly very, very close. She's at about 50%. Now, keep in mind, everyone says she's brain dead and easy to play, but she's really not. She's volatile, like I mentioned before, because she can completely take over a game, and it feels like there's nothing you can do, and just hard carry 1v9 if she gets out of the laning phase and gets to 2 or 3 items. But she can also be completely shut down. And, jumping around in the fight, sometimes it can be very easy, but sometimes it can be kind of tricky as well. But that win rate is at about 50%. And historically, she's closer to 47 or 48%. So it might feel like a little weird that these hard engaged champs aren't destroying her right now. It's like, well, how does Yumi even get to play the game against Leona in lane? It's like, well, she just dies 7 times and then outscales her at 20 minutes because the enemy team doesn't know how to close out the game. They don't threaten Baron, they don't push their lead, they just run around and YOLO queue, and Yumi eventually gets 2 items, and somehow Master Yi gets a triple kill in one team fight, and that's the game. You just attach Yumi to Master Yi, game over, right? And so this kind of stuff happens all the time. So I don't have the historical data on her win rate here, but I'm pretty sure that historically she's much closer to like 48% win rate. So 50% is doing very, very well for her. So anyways, and a lot of people stay attached too long. Like, it seems like she's easy to play, but you got to know when to bail, right? Because if you just stay attached to someone too long and then they die and then you get CC'd, you can't reattach to somebody else and you end up dying. So it can be kind of tricky to decide, when you need to abandon somebody or not. And then the last one that I'll mention, and I know we're way over time here, is Janna, and she does have a really high win rate, and she can be oppressive in the lane. I just have her a bit lower just because she doesn't have any engage, right? Like, your engage is walk up and W them, so you really can't ever, like, comfortably start a fight. At least Yumi has her ult, which is like an AoE, like 1.75 second root. And Yumi just outscales Janna, I think. I mean, I don't know that, like, the head-to-head, the win rate might be in Janna's favor, but I can just tell you anecdotally, it depends on the ADCs, honestly, and how fed the ADCs are. But it just feels like Yumi's just going to outscale her. Like, in a lot of situations, Yumi just has way more options in terms of, like, who to play around and how to win. So, strong against... Let me see, where does Yumi fall on this? I am kind of curious to see how this matchup works. I think it said that, yeah, so it says that you win 52% of the time against Yumi. But, nevertheless, I don't like that matchup too well. But anyway, Janna's like pretty good. Historically, she's great into these types of champs like Leona and Alistar and stuff like that, because you can just tornado and stop their engage. But the problem is they have so much CDR, and they're going to have more CDR than you do now for once in their life, right? They're going to have that 50. You're going to be sitting there with Mandate, and have your 20. Now, you can get Ionians on this next patch and get up to 40, and I guess you could take the Rune too and get close to 50. So you might be able to match them if you go Ionians. A lot of people are still going to go, mobility boots and boots of swiftness and stuff on her. But it's just difficult. And especially when Leona's ult is going to be on like a 40-second cooldown, you can't peel that, right? If you're Janna and you don't have flash and she hits you with her ult, you're probably dead, right? Because she's going to hit you with the ult. If she gets the stun, she's going to E in and then Q you. You're going to be CC'd for like 3 seconds, and the ADC is just going to Gale Force in and blow you up, right? Because there's just so much damage right now. So I don't know. It can feel really bad. Even some of these matchups that historically have favored her can feel pretty rough. So I don't know. She is a great user of Mandate. You know, your Q does proc it. Your ultimate pushing everybody back does proc it. She's good with Staff of Flowing Water, but she can roam around and play YOLO Q really well, right? And help your split pushers out and get some pretty good vision. So I think she is pretty good, but it feels so bad later on in the game when I've been, played Janna and everyone's just standing around like, and there's a great opportunity, the enemy's just stepping out of position a lot, but I can't pull the trigger. I just remember one game in general, like in particular, we had this Hecarim on our team, and I was just sitting around with Janna. I was like spam pinging, like, hey, go, 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 start the fight, and he just would not start the fight. And like they were just so far out of position. I think like their top laner was bottom with Ignite. They were pushing mid lane with Baron or something, and their, somebody without a teleport was bottom lane, and I was like 4v5, go, 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 go. Like they screwed up, right? They're not respecting the Hecarim engage, and he just never pulled the trigger. And stuff like that happens all the time. Like, that's nothing special. Like, you just have people, and that was a platinum level game. I think it might have been diamond. I can't remember. But there's just so many people that just will not pull the trigger and just do not know how to engage, even if they're playing engaged champions. And with Janna, you can't. It just can feel helpless in some of those situations. Now, if you have a team that does know how to engage and they're firing on all cylinders, and you're protecting, your super fed Kaisa or something with Janna, yes, she feels amazing. But I think it's just that little bit of like loss of control where you can't like make really good plays that you might be able to make with other champions is something that has me, a little nervous about Janna. Right? It's like you could say the same thing about Nami, I guess, but I feel like Nami is much more lane dominant. It's like, yes, Janna can spam W and deal damage, but Nami does damage and heals herself and has kill threat with the bubble in the laning phase. So I think I would just probably rather have Nami. She doesn't scale as well, but she's got more pressure in lane, or Yumi, who I think scales better. But maybe that's just me. Okay, well, that's going to be it for this video. I guess I'll just mention, I do think if you do want to play an AP champion that's not Maokai, like Brand is pretty good right now. Some of the adjustments they made to him are strong. They have nerfed a lot of AP items, but Leandri's is still good. They haven't nerfed Demonic Embrace yet, so that's still going to be pretty solid. So I think that Brand can be okay. The problem is, Leandri's is 3,400 gold, and a lot of the other enchanters are going to start getting their items at 2,500. So unless you're getting kills, it can feel really, really bad if you fall behind. And if you get grabbed by any of these champions, you're obviously going to die. But a nice thing about Brand is if they have a lot of melee champions later on, even if you're behind, you can just press R and it's just going to do a lot of damage just because in a team fight, right? And so you do have a certain level of, guaranteed threat even if you're behind. And that's why I'm kind of liking Brand a little bit more than Zyra right now, even though I didn't put him on the list as such. It's just because you do have that guaranteed level of threat. Yeah, with Zyra, you can maybe throw down some plants and R and things like that, but it takes a couple more button presses to do that, and I think it's just not as much guaranteed damage. Also, the dot damage is very nice for refreshing the Leandries and refreshing the Demonic Embrace, versus the plants have to hit them every time to refresh. If they like flash away or dash or whatever, they may not get as many procs. So I don't know, Brand is pretty good right now, especially if you're golden lower. So if you want something that's like a little more aggressive as far as like the damage side, I think Brand could be a pretty decent option. Then these other champs are good too. Like Seraphine can be good. She can poke really hard. Lulu can scale really well, in the laning phase, or like she has some threat in the laning phase and she can scale pretty well later. I'd probably rather play Yumi, but Lulu can be good. Nautilus might seem a little curious, like why is Nautilus up here? I did say I would mention him later. A big part of it is he's just been nerfed so many times. I feel like his defense is just not going to be as strong as all these other champs. His base stats are going to be a little bit lower than some of them, and his W just feels really anemic. It's on a long cooldown, and it just doesn't feel like it does as much as the other ones. And a big thing, too, is his hook can't go through minions and it can't go over walls. So there's going to be a lot of opportunities that you're going to miss just because of that. And his ultimate does have that slight delay. It doesn't come up all the time, but it comes up more than you'd think, where I'm trying to like press, ultimate to CC someone and I can't, right? So it's like Master Yi Alpha Strikes out of nowhere, or Kha'Zix goes invisible, Vayne tumbles and goes invisible, Kaisa, goes invisible with her E. There's just all these little weird things, or it's just too slow, right? Like I'm just winding up, throwing the ultimate, and then the missiles, going through the ground, and then Katarina's already deleted 3 people on my team before it hits her, right? So it's just sometimes he just feels like he's a little slow. Like his auto attacks are very slow, before they hit somebody. So it just feels like he's just slow. It's not as crisp. His damage is lower than it used to be. So he still can be good. I would just rather play any of these other engaged champions, most likely. But, Nautilus can still be pretty good. So I don't know. Maybe Nautilus could be up here, tier 1 or tier 2. He probably could be, honestly. But I always try to keep it at 5 for each tier, just so the tier lists have some kind of meaning. But if you're really good on, any of these champs, you could definitely bump them up quite a bit as far as the rankings go. But anyways, that's going to be it for this tier list. I wanted to give you an extra long one here just to kind of talk about sort of my change of heart about some of these champions, and just to give you some really good, hopefully some in-depth things to think about as you're making your own decisions at the start of the season. But that's going to be it. Have a good day, and I'll see you next time.